thank you all very much for waiting for the final panel. It might be the final panel, but it's obviously one of the most important topics for global economic development these days, and that is financial inclusion. And we have a great panel to talk through some of the key issues today. I want to begin with a poll, just to warm up the crowd and to get a sense of what you're thinking of. So we have a first poll question on the role of fintech when it comes to financial inclusion, which will come up on your screens in a minute. So let's get a sense as to how you all feel where the financial inclusion debate is going. Is fintech the game changer that it needs, or is it overhyped? And I note on the panel we have one very good fintech expert whose notes are all in handwritten on paper. So I'll give you a sense of where we're going. So those results will come up shortly. But Mel, I want to start off with you, if you don't mind. We were talking beforehand. One of the issues with financial inclusion is it's very well understood to be very important for economic development. But it's not yet really center stage in the global policy debate, I think. What's happening, do you think? Is enough being done to coordinate all the bits and pieces around the world? Are the dots being joined? Or is financial inclusion still very disjointed?
So 8 years ago, the G20 endorsed a financial inclusion action plan and established a global partnership for financial inclusion as a means of implementing it. So there's no doubt that financial inclusion is an international policy priority. And there's a lot of work on strategy. But as perhaps a practitioner, I would suggest that the implementation in countries is a little bit patchy. And I think what's missing is usually an institutional framework to do that, because we need a coordinated action from government, lots of aspects of government, education, finance ministry, regulator. We need action from companies, and we need all that to be coordinated. And right now, that's not happening. Not happening. Is the momentum just not there at G20 level? Is there sufficient support not there? Some countries are making greater progress than others, but it is difficult, I think, for government, it seems, to coordinate the different silos within their own organizations. Now, just in terms of some governments making progress, I know you have experience in China, for example, with financial inclusion. What kind of lessons can be drawn from what you're seeing in China? Is there something of a model there for other parts of the world, or is it more a policy development that is unique to their system? So one of China's clear policy priorities is to lift their people from poverty, so poverty alleviation. The efforts in China have been split between the government and private sector, such as companies like ourselves. So financial inclusion is a key element of our corporate social responsibility. And we've been running programs in, for example, in Shaanxi province, which is a relatively poor area. And there's been a curriculum developed for schools, and that's been implemented. Chinese have been very effective. They've done it very quickly, and we'll see how that progresses. The real challenge is to achieve scale if you're a private sector operator. We've put 2 million people in China through financial education, and financial education is a key element of financial inclusion. It's, in a sense, the demand side of the equation, making people understand how to manage their money and what products are out there. But it's hard to make that scalable when you're doing it through community work groups, in shopping malls. We need to somehow get it online. That won't work everywhere because not everyone's online. But one idea that we're working with the Chinese government on is gamification, which of course is a kind of buzzword of the moment in the fintech industry. But people will perhaps be more interested in learning about budgeting if we can turn it into a game. Right. But does that require internet access as well? It certainly does. So that's a challenge in other places. Yeah. Okay. Shinta, we are in your home country. I know this is a passion of yours, so do you want to explain what's happening in Indonesia and the kind of initiatives that you are involved in as well?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I have to say this is good news for Indonesia because according to the World Bank report, the Financial Inclusion Index, we are the country that most progressed in East Asia and Pacific. So, you know, congratulations, Indonesia, we made the most progress. I just want to share with you some numbers. Actually, where we were before and where we are today. In 2011, I think we were, in 2011, we were only 11% has bank accounts in Indonesia, adults. In 2014, 20%. And today is 48.9%. So it's a clear progress for us, even owning a bank account. That's the first statistic. The second, I think Indonesia has a strong use also for savings account. Now this is important because the tendency to save was something that needs to be educated. So in this, there's a 10% percentage point higher than other developing world average. So this is also good news for us. And 60 million unbanked adults, and this is interesting, use mobile phone today, 60 million. And out of that, 33% said that the biggest challenge was distance. And Indonesia, as you know, still have a big issue on the penetration. Our internet users are still an issue. So this is something definitely that needs to be paid attention to. Now, if we look at the MSME, this is the grassroots that's important, I think the government now also has reached out by making the credit for the people with very low interest, 7%. And we also clearly see the increase of number that are utilizing this credit. However, if we look at the Indonesian grassroots, we have obviously a lot of programs on credit, microfinancing, and so forth. But we are lacking is the inclusion of how to put more the missing middle. So we find that there's a lot down here on grassroots. There are now a lot of programs, a lot of NGOs supporting also microfinancing. Up there, we look at a lot of the VC are also investing, but there's a clear missing middle here. And this is where me through my organization called the Angel Investment Network start looking at some alternative financing as well for our SME, especially for our startups.
So can you just explain what can be done then to tackle that key missing middle exactly?
Yeah, so what we think here is obviously the startup community also is quite large, right? It's now also start picking up in Indonesia. But a lot, they have three major difficulties. Obviously the access to the market, a lot of the capacity including business skills, all the basic of doing actual clear business plan and so forth. But importantly is the access to financing. Mm-hmm. So where we are sitting right now is we need financing for those who cannot use the formal banking financing, right? They don't have collaterals. So this is where we come in with angel investing as well to give seed funding for those SMEs and startups who wants to grow up their business. And obviously, this is still quite small. At the moment, we're working about 2,500 startups. We need to definitely scale up. But I think there is now opportunity for more, and this is not just also about financing, but also providing mentoring, the networking. So this is I think now very much into what we're doing in Indonesia.
So fintech is obviously an opportunity then, I assume, for
definitely.
Like maybe can we pull up the poll results to see what people think about fintech, whether it's so clearly. Most people are on board in terms of the positive impact, even if Mel still uses handwritten notes. Yeah. But Sopnendu, can I ask you? You're the policy guy here. Can you tell us what the Singaporean Monetary Authority is doing and where you're trying to be ahead of the curve in pushing through financial inclusion?
Sure. I think I saw there's a 20% hyped worry on the whole space. I think a fair assessment in that sense. There's a bit of hype in the whole fintech space. But from a policy standpoint, let me frame it a little deeper. Because in fact, the unsaid or undiscussed item here is that the whole financial inclusion is riding on this whole thing called digital economy. So how do policymakers react to this whole space? And from a Singapore standpoint, I think it's perhaps applicable to everybody here, is that there are 10 policy choices regulators have to make in a way to power this financial inclusion and the digital economy agenda. The first policy they have to start thinking is the establishing a trusted national digital identity, because the future is going to be faceless, presenceless in the transaction way we do it with each other, be it an individual or a corporate. The second policy choice, and perhaps a bit of infrastructure from a public policy perspective, is establishing a trusted digital data hub. In the world of fake news and fake data, there's a need to establish a way to create a trusted data hub which get associated with that ID through which the data is getting created. And the third piece, which is perhaps a learning from India's Aadhaar journey, is how do you craft a customer consent architecture? I want to spend a couple of seconds here, because the empowerment of sharing digital data must lie with the citizens of the country, and they must be empowered to share with the third party if they get a real benefit, and should be have ability to withdraw the data if they choose to. And the fourth area on the public policy side is around building public infrastructure which will power digital economy. Things like eKYC, a huge burden for financial inclusion, how to know your customer. Can government build a public KYC utility where banks and fintech can take the data, do a straight-through onboarding? Can we build public utility for trade hubs where banks can finance based on trusted data of exporters, importers, logistic companies, shipping company? So there are this series of public infrastructure to be built to power this digital economy. So that's the four starting policy stack. There are three technology stack on top of that. We all know the whole computing is happening on cloud. Regulators must establish a policy for allowing institutions to use cloud. Without a clear policy on cloud, I don't think this will be super scale, what we expect it to be. Second, the shift to API architecture, application program interface. Historically, all the sectors sit on an enterprise closed system. There has to be a shift where the data get piped out in an open economy where this can be all interacted, different product can be created. And the third element in the technology stack is data policy, because progressively countries are making wrong choices around data localization. If every country decides to lock down the data, it is going nowhere. The whole digital economy is not going to scale if the choices we make about data is restriction. Of course, there are issues around data. What are the issues? Fairness of use of data, ethical choice of the data, accountability of how to use data, and transparency. Those are the policy choices we've got to make, but the answer to the question is not restricting access to data. The remaining three of the 10 stack is around talent. We got to build extremely good talent for this new economy. The current talent are not designed to support this economy. At every level, from CEO to operating level, there need to be a talent shift. The ninth policy stack is policy making through experiment. I just introduced in IMF meetings, we are in the era of sandbox. A lot of sandbox you hear, regulators are calling, we are doing experiment. We got to shift to jukebox. There should be a series of policies available to experiment as you recraft the policies, because historically, policymakers are used to make policy through work papers. That takes 3-4 years. Technology is moving at a speed of 6 months. By the time the policy is out, the technology is legacy. It doesn't match. So how do you bring it together is the ninth element. And the last one is cybersecurity. It must be a non-negotiable contract for policymakers to design a trusted cybersecurity policy which impacts from identity to policymaking in a thoughtful way. So 10 policy choices for public policymaker.
Just one or two little things to chew on there, I guess, to get our head around. Mel, did you want to comment?
So I find myself in violent agreement with you. But let me challenge maybe on a couple of things. One is ultimately the regulator's job is to create trust in the financial system, because that's the fundamental foundation of any kind of participation. So in doing all those things, it's very important not to lose that element of trust. And I think one of the experiences we've had over the last few years has been not the regulatory sandbox, but the kind of regulatory field that's allowed a whole...
Now I call it jukebox.
or a wide open jukebox that has allowed, for example, P2P players and a whole series of unregulated institutions to enter the regulated space on an uneven playing field. And it's been something of a disaster, and it's undermined trust in the financial system, which has set us back. So one of the things I would, as somebody from a regulated institution, urge is that there is a kind of level playing field at a product level, regardless of who the provider is.
Yes.
But on everything else, I find myself completely agreeing.
Let me quickly answer your question, because we are shifting. In fact, Singapore has shifted to activity-based regulation. So if somebody is doing an activity, there's a 1% risk, we must regulate for that 1% risk. Don't overburden institution with where the risk doesn't match to the regulatory burden they're carrying. So how do we shift from entity regulation to activity-based regulation is the key to the success of digital economy.
And that's exactly what I was just about to comment, because, obviously talking with policymaker, there's like 10 policy, 20 policy. At the end of the day, what can be executed? So I think with our government at the moment, even starting point of being cashless, at the moment we already have the social safety net, which is very important, linked up to the e-payment, to the electricity bills, and so on. Those are the basic that we are starting. So obviously there's a big gap where we are now and where you guys are, but I think efforts like this are very important, and obviously regulator needs to pay attention to a lot of these details, right? And when we talk about Indonesia, obviously we are a very large populated country, 260 million people, and at the moment, for example, I was just talking to Melinda Gates, and we were talking about women economic empowerment. That's a big, big issue, because right now, access financing for women, we're talking about SDG number 5, gender equality, but obviously it's still a big issue. So when we talk about financing for all, we want to talk about grassroots all the way, all people, but even women itself as an entity, it's an issue.
I want to expand on that very point, Shinta, in one moment, if you don't mind, but could we maybe have the second poll question now, please, which is asking what is on the policy side of things. So if the audience can vote on that, and we'll come back to the results. So Shinta, you make the very important point about the role of women in all of this. And I do have a question for you on Indonesia in particular, which is the question of why women cannot get a loan if they're not accompanied by men, for example. Do you want to explain the societal barriers and challenges that are associated with that?
Yeah, we're not talking about women sitting here in big city. Obviously, there's a lot of women in remote areas in Indonesia that still does not have, ownership of any assets will be belonging to the husband, right? A lot of the women are part of sharing, working with the husband, but obviously the husband is the one for. So they can't even go to a banking institution and, and basically wants to borrow money. They can't do that, right? Anything they do have to be with the signature of the husband. So I think when we talk about economic empowerment, the access is definitely an important one. Obviously they need to be educated, right? They need to understand that they are able to do it, but we need to give the support system, the ecosystem needs to be there so that they can have the same opportunity like men, because a lot of them are the one bringing the business. So I think this is where it's important that we build this network. And I think digitalization is one of the areas that has really helped a lot of our women. They can now also work from home, using the mobile, looking into businesses, marketing through that. So we have a program for coding for women, for example. It's been very, very successful because now, women can actually use this to do actual work. So I think these opportunities are very, very important.
Then from the policy viewpoint, and not even Singapore per se, but generally, do you think there's enough cognizance of the importance of financial inclusion for women, and are policymakers talking enough about it?
I think absolutely. I think my premise is that digital ID is gender neutral. So in a large way, if you put a gender neutral method of engaging, a lot of women today have physical barrier to interact in the system. the whole digital economy creates that remarkable opportunity for women in a very remote. I come from India. I do understand how, from a small town, the whole interaction process is very challenging. But with a digital identity, with an ability to operate on a cloud, with a very simplified, basic technology adoption, remarkable change can happen within the whole ecosystem. I think that's, I personally believe, is a huge hope for, especially on the digital economic construct.
Mel, sorry.
Just quickly, we were just sharing about what would be the difference if the woman controlled the account. Apparently, it's much better when the woman is actually controlling the account to pay for the children's schooling and everything. And this was an open discussion, but I thought that's interesting, right? I mean, women taking control of the account is much better job.
And just to echo, I just came across a policy choice of encouraging property ownership, co-ownership between women in the family.
Yeah.
Because today the collateral-based economy doesn't operate because women have no rights on the property. So how do you start shifting some of these social changes will have a remarkable impact on the long run?
Mel, do you have any comment on this?
So yeah, I would say that for financial inclusion, cultural and psychological factors are a big influence. And that means that the program needs to be tailored to the local culture. But I must say I agree that the mobile technology has really massively increased access for people who perhaps, for the reasons you outlined, wouldn't be able to do it before.
So we're into our final few minutes. I just want to go back to you, Shinta, for Indonesia. You have the big election coming up next year. Is financial inclusion at the center of the policy debate here? Is there enough attention on it?
Definitely. Indonesia, right now, government is also looking into what we call economic equality. They really think the gap, between the rich and poor, 3.9 Gini ratio, is still, quite alarming. So I think that we are looking towards programs for economic equality, and financial inclusion is a big part of it, And like I said, for the basic people to have needs. I mean, we have now cash transfer programs for the poor. How to alleviate more on the social. When we talk about financial inclusion, there's a lot of social needs as well that's integrated towards it. And I think when we talk about how to provide people with the basic necessity of health, and health and education is very, very basic, And I think this is where government needs to play a role. We need to be able to really provide a program that can be inclusive for all the Indonesian people.
Could we have the poll result on the policymakers as we wrap up? Because I want to. So there you go. Our policymakers doing enough. So yes. fair to say that must try harder. But let us close on one question for each of you then. Perhaps starting with you, Shinta, because you were just talking about policy. What's the one policy wish that you have that policymakers in Indonesia or globally will push through to develop financial inclusion?
Yeah, I think the government needs to look at more on the implementation level. I think they need to really see what is happening on the ground, and thus I think they can develop policy that can be targeted towards what's missing here. And a lot of time, I think this is where policies needs to be created based on what's happening, what's needed. And sometimes, we are not, I think, urgent enough in monitoring on progress. So a lot of time policy, we have actually launched, like for example, 16 economic packages, and then it's thrown out there, but in actual execution it's still very weak. So I think what I want is not just giving, because our government is doing the right thing. There's many policies that's already right, but more focusing on how to make sure that the implementation is based what we want.
Execution. Mel, any thoughts?
So I'm on the same answer, execution. I think the strategic policy framework is there. I think it has priority, but implementation is failing. I think it's failing because there isn't adequate coordination and there isn't an institutional framework to see it through.
And Sopnendu, you have a playlist on your jukebox, right? You've got 10 tunes. Which one would you pick?
Absolutely, my single biggest ask for policymakers to build public infrastructure which is desired in a digital economy. KYC utility, trusted data hub, efficient payment rail system. They are bread and butter of a digital economy. They must build a platform which is level playing for everybody, small, big. Public policymakers have to find a way to separate governance from network operating. Operating networks should be left to private players. Governance should stay with policymakers. Today, it's all mixed. I think that's where the inefficiency comes.
Okay, well, we have to end it there due to time constraints, but could you please all thank the panel for their comments on financial inclusion?